He stood before the king, unshaken, his voice ringing like thunder. "O altar, altar, thus says the Lord." The people gasped. The priests froze. The golden calf loomed behind the king, a silent idol in the face of prophecy. Then, crack! Before their eyes the altar split apart. Ashes poured to the ground like blood. The king's hand, outstretched in command, withered before he could seize the prophet. His power meant nothing. He had defied the living God. But the prophet, the man sent by Yahweh, did not stay to bask in victory. He did not claim a reward, for he had been given one command beyond his prophecy. Do not eat, do not drink, do not return by the same road. It should have been simple, a mission of obedience, a moment of glory, followed by safe passage home. But the greatest test was not before the king. It lay waiting on the road ahead, and in a moment of weakness, deception would bring him to his end. For disobedience has a price, and the lion was waiting. The kingdom of Israel had once been a mighty force, united under the rule of David and Solomon. Jerusalem had stood as the center of worship, the temple gleaming in gold and splendor. But peace had not lasted. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam took the throne in Jerusalem. But the young king was arrogant, heedless of the wisdom of his elders. When the people pleaded for lighter burdens, Rehoboam answered with pride, "My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." That was the moment everything fell apart. A rebellion ignited in the northern tribes. They turned against the house of David and crowned Jeroboam, son of Nebat, as their king. Israel split into two nations, Judah in the south, ruled by Rehoboam, and Israel in the north, ruled by Jeroboam. At first, Jeroboam seemed like a man chosen by God. A prophet had even foretold his rise. But power corrupts. Fear, not faith, drove him. Standing in his palace at Shechem, Jeroboam gazed toward the south, toward Jerusalem, toward the temple. He knew his people would eventually want to worship there. If they returned to the holy city, their hearts would turn back to Rehoboam. And so, he devised a plan, one that would change Israel's destiny forever. "I must secure the loyalty of my people," Jeroboam whispered, pacing before his advisers. He knew that religion was the foundation of power. If he could reshape their faith, he could ensure their loyalty. He summoned artisans and goldsmiths, ordering them to fashion 2 great golden calves. When they were completed, he stood before the people of Israel and declared, "Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." The words were a chilling echo of the past, the same words spoken by Aaron in the wilderness generations before. But the people did not resist. Many were weary of Jerusalem's laws and regulations. Others simply followed their king blindly. Jeroboam placed 1 golden calf in Bethel, near the southern border, and the other in Dan, in the north. Bethel, once a place where God had spoken to Jacob in a dream, was now corrupted by idolatry. The king appointed false priests, men not from the tribe of Levi. He established new festivals, imitating those of the Lord, but twisted to serve his own rule. And so, the land was led astray. God watched from the heavens, and his anger burned. But he would not let this sin go unchallenged. A messenger would be sent. In the land of Judah, to the south, a man of God knelt in the quiet of his home. He had no great wealth, no noble title, no warriors at his command. But he had something greater, the voice of the Almighty. That morning, before the sun had fully risen, the Lord spoke to him. "Arise, my servant, go to Bethel, stand before the king, speak my words and do not be afraid." The prophet's breath caught in his throat. To speak against the king? to walk into a city filled with idolatry and proclaim judgment. But the Lord's voice continued, "Speak against the altar, proclaim the sign I give you, and heed this command: do not eat bread or drink water in that land, nor return by the way you came." The prophet rose, wrapping himself in his cloak. He had long learned that when God speaks, obedience is not an option, it is life itself. He gathered his staff, stepped onto the road, and began his journey north. To Bethel, to face a king, to speak for the Lord. The prophet walked north, leaving the hills of Judah behind him. The land gradually changed. The olive groves and vineyards of Judah gave way to the wilder, rockier terrain of Israel. He traveled alone, his footsteps steady, his mind focused on the Lord's command. But as he neared Bethel, unease settled in his chest. This was not Judah. This was enemy land. He had heard stories of Jeroboam's rule. Men who opposed the king's reforms had been silenced. Some had vanished. Others had been declared traitors. Would the king welcome him? No. Would the people listen? Perhaps. Would he return alive? Only God knew. Still, he pressed on. From the distance, the city of Bethel came into view. Smoke curled into the sky, not from the hearths of homes, but from the great altar where Jeroboam and his priests burned incense before the golden calf. The prophet clenched his staff tighter. "O Lord, strengthen my spirit. Let me not fear man, but you alone." And then, with a deep breath, he entered the city. The streets of Bethel were bustling with people. It was a festival day, a counterfeit feast, designed to mimic the holy festivals of Yahweh. Men and women carried baskets of offerings. Merchants sold incense and sacred oils. Musicians played flutes and tambourines, their melodies mixing with the murmured prayers of the worshippers. But what struck the prophet most was the golden calf. It loomed above the altar, its polished surface reflecting the firelight. The idol had been crafted with care, its features finely chiseled, its golden sheen making it appear almost divine. But it was lifeless, a deception, a shadow of the truth. The prophet exhaled sharply. This was why he had come. Up ahead, a figure in royal garments stood before the altar, King Jeroboam himself. The king lifted his hands, preparing to offer incense. The priests stood beside him, chanting prayers to the false god. The moment had come. The prophet stepped forward. And then, with a voice like thunder, he spoke. "O altar, altar! Thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon you shall he sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you. Human bones shall be burned upon you." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. The priests turned. The worshippers froze. Jeroboam's hand, still holding the incense, hovered in mid-air. And then, before anyone could respond, the prophet lifted his staff and declared, "This is the sign the Lord has given. This altar shall be split apart, and its ashes shall be poured out." At that very moment, a great crack rang through the air. The ground trembled. The altar shuddered, split down the middle, and collapsed in a cloud of dust. The sacred ashes spilled onto the ground, defiled before the eyes of the people. Gasps and screams filled the air. Terror gripped the worshippers. The prophet stood firm, his face set like stone. Jeroboam's shock turned to rage. This nameless man, this outsider from Judah, had humiliated him before his own people. He had cursed the altar. He had prophesied doom. His face contorted with fury, and he thrust his hand forward. "Seize him!" he bellowed. The royal guard surged forward, but something strange happened. The king's outstretched hand froze in place. His fingers, twisted in command, would not move. Pain shot through his arm. His skin withered before his eyes, his flesh twisting and hardening. His hand had become paralyzed, lifeless as stone. A cry of agony escaped his lips. The guards halted. The priests fell back in horror. The king, the mighty ruler of Israel, was stricken, powerless before the prophet of Yahweh. Jeroboam turned desperately to the man of God. His voice, moments before filled with command, now trembled with desperation. "Please, entreat the favor of the Lord your God and pray for me, that my hand may be restored." The prophet, unmoved by pride, lifted his eyes to the heavens and prayed. And instantly, before the eyes of the people, Jeroboam's hand was restored. He flexed his fingers in disbelief. The pain was gone. The paralysis had vanished. The people gasped again, this time in awe. This prophet's words were not his own. They came from a power far greater. Jeroboam's anger melted away, replaced by something else, fear. The king stepped down from the altar. His expression softened. This man had called fire from heaven. He had spoken words that shattered stone. He had touched the divine. And so he turned to the prophet and said, "Come with me to my house and refresh yourself. I will give you a reward." The crowd leaned in. The tension was thick in the air. Would the prophet accept? Would he find favor in the king's house? But the man of God's face remained solemn. He shook his head. "If you were to give me half your house, I would not go with you. For the Lord commanded me, 'Do not eat bread or drink water in this place, nor return by the way you came.'" The king's brow furrowed. He had not expected such a refusal. But before he could respond, the prophet turned, gathered his cloak, and walked away, leaving the king, the shattered altar, and the stunned crowd behind. He had done what he was sent to do. Now he had to leave. The man of God had delivered his message. The altar had split. The prophecy had been spoken. The king had been humbled. Now, all that remained was obedience. Would he follow the Lord's command and leave Bethel as instructed? Would he resist the temptations that lay ahead? Or would he falter? The path before him was not just a road, it was a test. The sun hung heavy in the sky as the prophet made his way out of Bethel. The road was quiet. The city behind him bustled with confused whispers. Who was this man? Would Jeroboam retaliate? Would the prophecy come to pass? But the prophet did not turn back. His mission was over. He had obeyed the Lord's command. Now, all he needed to do was leave Bethel behind. No eating, no drinking, no returning the same way. His throat was dry, the sun was merciless, the dust from the road clung to his feet, but he walked on. Yet, though he did not know it, danger was near. Someone had been watching. In the city of Bethel, an old prophet sat in his house, his sons at his side. They had witnessed everything, the man of God's words, the king's withered hand, the splitting of the altar. And now they recounted the tale to their father. The old prophet listened, his eyes narrowing. Once he too had been a prophet. Once he had spoken for Yahweh. But now he was forgotten. No visions came to him, no voice called his name. And yet, God had sent another man to Bethel, a prophet from Judah, not from among his own people. Jealousy stirred within him. Curiosity burned. Who was this man? What gave him such power? The old prophet rose abruptly. Which way did he go? He demanded. His sons pointed down the road. The old man saddled his donkey and set off in pursuit. The man of God had stopped to rest under a great oak tree, its branches offering a brief respite from the sun. His feet ached. His lips were cracked from thirst, but he had not eaten. He had not drunk. He had obeyed. Then he heard the clatter of hooves. He looked up to see a man approaching on a donkey, an old prophet, his face lined with years of wisdom and weariness. The old prophet dismounted and approached him. "Are you the man of God who came from Judah?" The younger prophet nodded. "I am." The old man smiled. "Come with me to my house and eat bread." The invitation was simple, kind even, but the man of God did not hesitate. He shook his head. "I cannot. For the Lord commanded me, do not eat bread or drink water in this place, nor return by the way you came." Silence hung between them. The old prophet studied the younger man, and then his lips parted with a lie. "Ah, but I too am a prophet as you are." And an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord, saying, "Bring him back with you to your house, that he may eat bread and drink water." His voice was smooth, his eyes kind. The younger prophet hesitated. Could it be true? Had the Lord changed his command? Had he sent this man to test his endurance? His body ached with exhaustion, his stomach clenched with hunger. And so he followed the old prophet back to his house. The old prophet's house was warm and inviting. Bread was placed before him. Fresh water was poured into a cup. For the first time since leaving Judah, the man of God ate and drank. He took a bite, a sip, and then the room went cold. The old prophet's face changed. His eyes darkened. His mouth trembled as the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And then, in a voice not his own, he spoke. "Thus says the Lord, because you have disobeyed my word and have eaten and drunk in this place, your body shall not be buried in the tomb of your fathers." The man of God froze. The bread turned bitter in his mouth. The water felt like poison in his throat. He had been deceived, and now judgment had been spoken. His heart pounded. His breath came in ragged gasps. What had he done? The old prophet did not speak another word. The man of God rose, his face pale, his hands trembling. His journey was over. His fate was sealed. The old prophet saddled a donkey for him. The younger man mounted it, his eyes dark with sorrow. He did not argue. He did not plead. He knew the truth. He had disobeyed. And now judgment was coming. The donkey carried him out of Bethel, along the lonely road. The sun was setting. Shadows stretched across the land. And then, from the wilderness, a great lion emerged. It moved with unnatural purpose. Its golden eyes burned like fire. The man of God did not run. He did not fight. He closed his eyes. And the lion struck. The prophet's body fell to the ground, lifeless. But then something strange happened. The lion did not devour him. The lion did not attack the donkey. Instead, the two animals stood side by side, guarding the body of the man of God. Travelers passing by beheld the sight, and word spread to Bethel. And when the old prophet heard of it, his heart sank. He had lied. He had deceived. And now a man had died because of him. But the prophecy had come to pass. The Lord's word had not failed. The man of God had fallen. His mission was complete, but his fate was sealed. Now, his story would not end with glory, but with sorrow. Yet, even in his death, his prophecy would echo through time. The old prophet of Bethel sat in silence as the news reached his ears. A traveler had come, breathless and pale, speaking of a strange sight on the road. "A man is dead, slain by a lion." But the lion did not devour him, nor did it touch the donkey. Both the beast and the burden stand beside the fallen body, as though keeping vigil. The old prophet's hands trembled. He closed his eyes. It had happened. His deception had led this man to his doom. And yet, his death was not ordinary. A lion should have torn the body apart or attacked the donkey. But it had not. This was not a random act of nature. This was divine judgment. The old prophet rose, his face stricken with sorrow. "Saddle my donkey," he commanded his sons. "I must go to him." The road to the man of God's body was eerily quiet. The old prophet's donkey moved slowly, the old man's thoughts heavier than the dust beneath them. When he arrived, he saw the sight for himself. The body lay untouched, save for the fatal wound that had taken his life. The lion stood beside him, still as a statue, its golden eyes staring ahead. The donkey was there too, unscathed. It was a message from God, a display of divine justice and mystery. The old prophet dismounted, kneeling beside the lifeless man. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he whispered, "Alas, my brother." Tears stung his eyes. He had called him a brother, though they had never met before that day, though he had deceived him. He lifted the body gently, placing it upon the donkey's back. Then, leading the animal, he turned and rode back toward Bethel. The people of Bethel gathered as the old prophet entered the city. The rumors had spread. They watched as the old man carried the body into his own home. There he prepared the burial. He wrapped the man of God in linens, washed away the dust of the road, and laid him in a tomb. And then, standing over the grave, he spoke words that would carry into the future. "When I die, lay my bones beside his." The people murmured. Why would he make such a request? The old prophet looked upon them, his voice grave. For the words that he spoke, the prophecy against this altar, shall surely come to pass. A king shall rise, Josiah by name. And he will break these false altars. He will burn the bones of these priests upon them. And when that day comes, let no man disturb these graves. The people were silent. Though the man of God had died in disobedience, his words would not die. Time passed. Kings rose and fell. The prophecy of the man of God was not forgotten, but it remained unfulfilled. Until, one day, a child was born in the house of David. His name was Josiah. He became king of Judah at just 8 years old. Unlike the kings before him, he did not walk in wickedness. Instead, he sought the Lord, and in the 18th year of his reign, he set his heart to cleanse the land. With fire and iron, he destroyed the high places. He tore down the altars of Baal, shattered the Asherah poles, and purged Israel of idolatry. Then his men came to Bethel. They found the ancient altar, the very one that had stood in defiance of God, the very one the man of God had cursed. And just as the prophet had foretold, Josiah commanded that it be broken. The false priests who had served there, their bones were burned upon the ruins. But then his men found something else, a tomb. Inside were 2 sets of bones. They turned to their king. "My lord, what shall we do with these remains?" Josiah paused. Then one of the elders of the city spoke. "These are the bones of the man of God who prophesied this very day, and the other, he was the prophet who buried him." Josiah's expression was unreadable. Then he spoke the final words of mercy upon the nameless prophet. "Let them rest, do not disturb them." And so, even in death, the man of God's prophecy stood true. His bones rested in a borrowed tomb. The city of Bethel moved on, the golden calf standing for generations. Kings rose and fell, but the prophecy remained. And 300 years later, when a boy king named Josiah arose in Judah, the words of the nameless prophet came to life. The altar was shattered. The bones of false priests were burned. And when they uncovered his tomb, Josiah himself gave the final decree. "Let his bones rest, do not disturb them." Though his name was lost to history, his voice was not. Though he fell to deception, his prophecy stood, and even now his story remains, a warning, a lesson, a truth that cannot die. For the word of the Lord never returns void.